So I had an opportunity to go through and test the Dawa products. It's not, before doing this testing, it's not something I had exposure before. Typically, we work with Access and Bosch and some of the more familiar names, but when getting to go through and test it, I was fairly surprised of the quality of product and what I was able to do, and kind of learning more about it. We had the Stephen Ray, the national, or the I think director of sales, come over and walk us through some stuff too as well when he was in town, and it's interesting to see what they're going through and doing. And they've only been in the U.S. for about 2.5 years, and it seems like they're expanding fairly large throughout the U.S. and they're adding a bunch of folks from a support standpoint in sales. But overall, it was an interesting test. So when looking at it, I had an opportunity to go through and test 3 models. The first one is their it's a 4K or 4K and/or 8 megapixel. They call it an eyeball camera. It's not the best name in the world for it, but it does look like a pair of eyeballs. It has the first one is the actual lens, and it's a fixed lens at 4 millimeters is the one I tested. I believe it comes in 2.8, and then I think 6 is the other one. And then it has a light on front of it, similar to like kind of those Access consumer grade cameras where you can turn on the light and either get a white light from a viewing standpoint or be able to scare someone away. The other one was a 1.3 megapixel with integrated IR and a fixed lens as well. It was 2.8 millimeter. And it's more their standard or light line, so it's their kind of high runner of cameras. And then the last one was a 180 panoramic camera that was new to them, and it has 3 imagers. Each one of them is 2 megapixels, and it stitches everything together and gives you a kind of a 180 view. I think a lot of the manufacturers where they are coming out with these, so it's Dawa's entrance into it. I'll say one thing is this thing's a beast of a camera. It probably weighs 10, 15 pounds. It's heavy. It's cast iron. And it's big. When we're looking at it on the website, it looked like it was comparable in size to like their dome camera, but it's probably 3 times the size of the dome camera. So it's a large device when we're looking at it. So what we did is I did some basic testing. Before I get into that, so I wanted to go through their Dawa resources because this is big for me when we're going through and kind of the support infrastructure they have for their cameras, like firmware, troubleshooting, a lot of the stuff they have on there. Dawa was a little bit interesting in how they broke out their stuff. Website, which usually contains everything, really didn't have a lot of information from an install standpoint. It was just basic product information, some spec sheets, and then they have kind of their accessories list. When you go down to the download section, you figure you'd find all the firmware on there. They didn't have that there. So I went through hunting. That was probably my biggest pain point through this testing process, was trying to upgrade the firmware and find it. But once you figured out the little of the way they structure things, it was easy to find once you knew where to look, but it took me a while to get there. The biggest thing on that is the wiki. So the wiki is their technical information, firmware, troubleshooting. That's where I think that everything that we would look at from a standpoint, sales would be on their website, and then the wiki would be on the technical side. But when we look at the wiki, that's where you get your firmware, that's where you get your software, that's where you get a lot of the product information that you're looking for, and that's where I eventually found the firmware. They also do have phone support. I actually didn't have to call phone support through this process, but they have in Irvine, California, they have they're building out a big phone support team. And when you go through and call them, when I did try to call, I had to leave a message, but when talking with Stephen, they're adding more folks to have a lower or higher response time. So the first camera I tested was the eyeball camera. It's the N84BG44. That's their new product naming schema. The old one, which is, I'll show you which one it is, these long ones that are the 25-character naming convention. They've shortened it since they moved to the U.S. They have a naming description or a kind of a translator to tell you what each one of those numbers meant. I don't remember what it is, but each one of those numbers means something. But when we were going through and doing the testing for this, this was the camera. We had it set 4K. It was at 10 frames per second. We did it at 15 feet with the 4 millimeter lens. when we went through and looked at it, it had fairly good quality when we looked at it. There was a little motion blur based on what we had setting, and I don't have any videos on here. And the quality was fairly good for the price point that it was at. So it seemed like you got pretty much a lot of bang for your buck. And the camera itself was, it wasn't cheap. You can tell that it was, I think it was IK4, and then it was IP67. So it'll hold up in the winters, and especially up here in Minnesota. That's important. But overall, the camera quality was good, and it worked like it should have. And I didn't have any issues from a video, or when we switched over to black and white, it was able to go through and flip over pretty easily. The other camera that we had was this fixed lens. They're more light or value line. It was 1.3 megapixels. Even though it was already focused at the factory at 2.8 millimeters, you can see on the image that the focus on there wasn't clear, and I couldn't fix that. So when you look at the shot from far away, it looks fine, but when you start pulling up and look at the fine details, you do start to see the kind of the blurriness around the edges. That's something I sent to Dawa for feedback, but overall the camera worked well. The IR lens, or the IR cut filter cut over within 10 seconds of it switching from night to dark, or from light to dark, and we did it at 0 lux, and you can still see facial features in the person sitting in the screen. Like I said, the last camera that we went through and tested was their 180 camera. That's on that picture on the bottom. There's 3 images stitched together, and it does that natively. It doesn't give you individual streams, so that's the only view that you're going to get from it. But it had fairly good quality. There was little warping, so it was a pretty clean image going across. The only thing that we saw, though, is when we moved it outside, you can't set the imagers independently. It's all kind of setting them all at once, but there was variations in color, and you can kind of see it where the wall is yellow here, but it's all white here, where there's variation in color by the lens. So if you were going through and you have it in the parking lot, it's going through the 3 lenses, you'll see a car change different, variations of a red or blue when it's going through it, so it wasn't consistent across the color. But the quality image was good. The IR, as you can see from the photos, lit up the room fairly well at 0 lux, and it worked well. And playback and everything was fairly good. Like I said, though, the only thing is that this is not something that you could attach to a drywall wall. It's something that it's heavy. It's 10, 15 pounds. It's more 10 pounds, but it's just a heavy, beefy camera. And it's one of those things where if you have a customer that has, is really, goes on from an aesthetically pleasing side, and they may balk of what this camera looks like on the exterior of their building. It's not that it looks ugly, it's just big. The Dawa web interface. So there's not much to talk about the web interface. It's pretty basic. It does everything that every other camera manufacturer does, so I guess that's a plus. But it has everything that you need it to have. From networking configuration settings, you can set up events in there. The storage, if it has an SD card, you can actually view playback events from the storage within the web interface itself. And it provides everything that a normal camera manufacturer provides. The one thing that they did change, and I think this has something to do with the denial of service attacks that they were involved in, was the password change. So in the most recent version of firmware, it used to not have you change the password when you log in. Now when you log in for the first time, it requires you to put in a new password, which I think is good. And it gets away from the text going through and just putting in the standard password that they have there. There is a discovery tool, or more of a configuration tool, that they provide. It's not, you download it off their wiki. It does some basic information. It's cross VLAN too, so a lot of the discovery tools out there, like Access or Bosch, your PC has to be on a specific VLAN for it to work. If you're on the same network and the VLANs, you're able to talk through them, this will find it on any VLAN that the cameras are put at. So I tested that, and I put the cameras on 3 different VLANs, and I was on another one, and it was able to find all the cameras, which is something that a lot of the tools don't do. You can go through and set IP addresses. You can do batch. You can modify the IP addresses in batches. This is where you do the firmware upgrades. You can do the firmware upgrades in the camera, but there is a tab here where it'll go down and do a series of firmware upgrades, so you don't have to do one at a time. and then some of the time date changes and the UI stuff, you know, the text that comes up on the screen, you can do that here too as well. So it was a good little tool to go through and use. It was good from a technician standpoint. We actually, after I got the test cameras, we did an install with Dawa just to see how it was from an installation standpoint. And we had 16 cameras. It was just a small system that we're putting in a small business. And the techs used this to upgrade the firmware to discover the cameras and all that, and it worked out fairly well. I also, this is probably the biggest part of my testing, is I went through and tested it in, you know, the 3 major VMS providers, and then Dawa's, you know, well, what they have on their NVRs. So I went through and tested it in a couple different areas. I had discovery, which, you know, how easy was it to discover and add it to the system, what configuration you could do within the VMS UI without having to go into the camera. Did it work with live and archive video? What driver was it using? Because was it a specific or an on-VIF driver? And then what was the health of the camera? Because I ran the camera on these systems from 2 to 3 weeks just to see if it would fall offline or when you had any issues, and if there's anything that there was, you know, let's say there was an issue if you had it installed, you know, a couple weeks from now. So on the discovery, or all this talk from the Dawa VMS, it's pretty much plug and play when you're putting in their NVRs. As soon as you plug in the camera, it pops up just like it's an analog NVR. You plug it into the Ethernet port, it's going to pop up in the associated screen, and it just works. The Dawa VMS is very basic. It's similar to a lot of the kind of the embedded Linux VMSs that are out there, but if you just need basic playback and live video, it does what you need it to do. You can do some basic configuration in there as well, so that's why I have a kind of a yellow in there, because it was very little. Like, you change the quality of the camera, change the frame rates per second, but if you want to do anything else above and beyond that, you're going to have to go directly into the Dawa camera. Didn't have any issues with live or archive video. When looking at how it was talking with the camera, it was through their Dawa integration. It wasn't on VIF, and then the health, it didn't go down at all, actually, the whole time that I had it on there. On the milestone and exact side, they were real similar, the first two across. The discovery, it worked for 2 of the cameras. It worked for the newer 180 and the 4K, but I couldn't get it to work for the fixed single lens camera. So I had to go through and actually use the Dawa discovery tool to get the IP address and then manually add it on there. There was virtually no configuration that you actually could do in milestone or exact, at least for these cameras. It was, if you wanted to change something, you had to go to the camera to change it, and basically that was it. Live and archive video worked fine. I didn't have any gaps. Motion detection worked fine on it, so, and always recording, so it worked like it should on those things, at least for the couple weeks I had it on the systems. And the driver that I was able to discover on was both on VIF. The only thing is, on the exact system, the 180 camera did drop off, and I actually had to re-add it back into exact, but after that it was fine. But for some reason, about a weekend, it went offline, and I had to go through and re-add it back in there to get it to come back online. But after I did that, it was fine. I don't know if it was a fluke thing. The last one on the Genetec side, I could not discover it in Genetec. For some reason, Genetec would not find it. Another thing on that one is I had to do some configuration changes, and I think this is Genetec's stance when they kind of banned Hikvision, or they put a restriction on them. It looked like they were doing something different with Dawa 2 as well. It was forcing me to put in TLS encryption on Dawa. It had password requirements. There's a lot of things where I had to make a lot of configuration changes in the Dawa camera before Genetec would let me put it into the system. And if I didn't, it basically said it doesn't meet our requirements and it won't add it. The configuration, Genetec was actually a little better than exact milestone, where you could actually do frame rate, you can do video quality, you can do stream selection. So they did have some type of ability to change things on there. They did have a Dawa specific driver for Genetec, but I couldn't get it to discover underneath that, so I had to use the on-VIF version, and then it went into it as well. I didn't have any issues with live or archive video, and then the health, it stayed up for the length of the term that I had it on the system. So overall, it worked well. And, the live archive, video, it played in all the major VMS providers, and I didn't run into any serious issues when we look at it. That was pretty much it when we look at it. So like overall, just in closing, it was the cameras, they're built well, they installed well, they worked. And for the price point, the ones that we put in the small business down, or when we did the test, I think it was $129 when we purchased it off of PSA. So it's fairly inexpensive if you want a fixed lens camera and you want an alternative to Hikvision. But when we look at it from an overall lineup standpoint, I looked at it as a tiered approach where this is more the low to mid-range camera. And if you're going into a competitive bid situation and you need a camera that's going to play well, this one seemed like it did, and it's a good alternative to the other low-cost providers out there. Any questions or?
Yeah, I was wondering on the security side, are you able to put different passwords in the camera, or does it stay with default passwords, or things like that?
Yep, you can put in different passwords on there, and different user groups too as well. Any other questions?
Your wrap up there. Yeah, if you go back to your quality comment on your last point there, you said low to mid range, or it's one of those good enough things. It's not necessarily high quality. How would you characterize that?
The cameras themselves were high. The build was good. It wasn't something where you pick it up and you're like, this should be at Costco on an end cap. It felt just like any other one of the major manufacturers. But the thing is I don't know, I'm kind of jaded in the standpoint of it's $120 and it does similar things that a Bosch or an Access camera does. What's wrong with it? And I couldn't find anything wrong with it, so I don't know if it's long term, but it's really inexpensive for what it appears to provide. But the camera itself and the quality, it seems like it works great. But when I'm looking at it from a bid standpoint, we still have to get over the stigma of, it's a Chinese manufacturer brand. But I'm looking at it if I'm going into a competitive bid, or I just have a real cost-conscious customer, that's when I'd probably go over to Dawa. But it works well, so I see as they kind of grow in the market, it should be a good camera.